But first, let's cross now to India, where my co-host and the ABC South Asia correspondent, Avani Dias, joins us from Delhi. But, Av, you just came back from Kashmir.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. As a foreign journalist living here in India, I never thought I'd actually get to step foot in the disputed Jammu and Kashmir territories, but the Indian government was hosting this G20 event, so they invited us along despite being really restrictive about permits into that area in previous years. And it was so fascinating to actually witness that region on the ground with my own eyes. Now, the Indian government was promoting tourism in the region of Kashmir to 20 delegates, including delegates from Australia. They're trying to encourage more foreign visitors to that beautiful, picturesque place. But of course, Mark, as you know, there is a huge history, a very complicated history in that area, and it is extremely militarised. So there were a lot of controversies surrounding this event.
And of course, this G20 meeting, how did it go with India's nuclear neighbours?
Look, it's been really controversial. China's boycotted the event. There have been protests in Pakistan. This region is really wedged between some major powers in that region. But this is what I was able to see when I was there on the ground. We've made it into Kashmir. This is one of the most controversial regions in South Asia. Both India and Pakistan lay claim to this place. There have been 2 wars, several conflicts, and thousands have died on both sides. On the ground here, there is a heavy military presence. It's all over this city of Srinagar, the capital of Kashmir. But this is also one of the most naturally beautiful regions on Earth. And millions of tourists have started to flock back here in the last couple of years, but a lot has happened to get to this point. The Himalayan region has been a flashpoint between India and Pakistan since independence in 1947, and now it's one of the most militarised zones in the world. Pakistan controls some of Kashmir, and part of the region is administered by the Indian government. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government in 2019 revoked its autonomous status, taking full control away from a local government and giving it to New Delhi. Pakistan wants a referendum to decide Kashmir's status, but the Indian government claims Kashmiris support Indian rule.
भारत इन सब चीजों को पीछे छोड़कर बहुत आगे आ गया है और मुझे लगता है कि G20 की प्रेसिडेंसी हमारे लिए गर्व का विषय है.
Kashmir is a naturally beautiful place. I am surrounded by snow-capped Himalayan mountains. There are stunning lakes, houseboats, you can go trekking. The history is really interesting. The weather's perfect in summer, and in winter you can go skiing in this region. But if the Indian government wants to attract more visitors to Kashmir, it's being pushed to deal with the security situation on the ground. India is holding a G20 meeting in Kashmir of the leading rich and developing nations. Security's been beefed up because of terror threats. Marine commandos searched the stunning Dal Lake as tourists enjoyed boat rides. Schools were shut down and bunkers hidden behind freshly painted walls. But while India is trying to project an image of normalcy, it's being criticised for holding the meeting in a disputed territory. China's boycotted the event and hundreds have protested in Pakistan against it. Many Kashmiris we spoke to did not want to speak on camera, but told us they felt crushed between 2 countries and were scared of speaking out. Almost 700 people were arrested in the lead up to the G20. Critics say to silence dissent. The Indian government says they're terrorist sympathisers. Dr. Sheikh Shaukat Hussain has been a human rights scholar at a number of universities. Last year, he was sacked as the head of the Central University of Kashmir's legal faculty. He says it was because he's been critical of the Indian government and that the G20's attempts to show normalcy in Kashmir don't reflect the situation on the ground.
Previously, we could express, we could write, we could go to Delhi and participate in seminars and conferences. But now that is a past. It is no more possible.
But other Kashmiris we spoke to are calling for more tourism to move on from the historical tensions.
बहुत अच्छा रहता है हम भी यही चाहते हैं यहाँ टूरिस्ट लोग आना चाहिए क्योंकि यहाँ का लोग आगे भी बढ़ सकते हैं
There are calls for the Australian government to downgrade its do not travel status. While the Indian government hopes to lure foreigners to the region, it's rare for them to grant international press access. This trip, granted because of the G20, has revealed a picturesque place with an uneasy calm.
This week saw Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visit to Australia. Around 20,000 fans welcomed him at Sydney's Kudos Bank Arena. The PM, Anthony Albanese, referred to him as the boss, and I have lost count of the number of times I heard media outlets mention his rock star welcome.
Last time I saw someone on the stage here was Bruce Springsteen, and he didn't get the welcome that Prime Minister Modi has got. You have brought the spirit of the world's biggest democracy to Australia.
And as for Modi himself...
नमस्ते ऑस्ट्रेलिया और जानते हैं इन सारे संबंधों का सबसे बड़ा आधार क्या है जानते हैं जी नहीं सबसे बड़ा आधार है म्यूचुअल ट्रस्ट और म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट
But it's worth pointing out, not everyone was happy about his visit.
We are protesting here as we are opposing the visit of Narendra Modi, but not only that, we are opposing the politics and policy of the BJP-led government.
Despite some of the protests, the fact is that Modi is still hugely popular in the diaspora in India at the moment.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. You know, obviously Narendra Modi, he's drawn these huge crowds, and as you mentioned, the rock star status kept getting discussed in Australia, the Bruce Springsteen references. But, you know, this is an Indian diaspora community in Australia of more than 780,000 people. Sure, there were maybe up to about 19,000 people in that stadium. There was that chartered plane. But let's not homogenise that big group of people because we know that there are so many different opinions there. On one hand, yes, there's a lot of support like there is here in India, huge popularity, huge praise for Modi's economic development here in the country. On the other side, there is concerns about some of his policies and what his critics say are policies targeting religious minorities here in India. So that kind of reflects within the diaspora in Australia as well. There are hugely different opinions there. But here in India, it was really fascinating to watch some of the coverage that went down. There was a lot of that rock star status, a lot of that attention on the reaction that Modi got, a lot of attention on Albanese's love for Modi, the fact that he consistently dismissed questions around threats to democracy, something we've spoken a lot about on this show, India Now. But one article and a few articles really went into the fact that the BBC documentary that goes into Modi's treatment of the Muslim minority here as his time as Gujarat Chief Minister, that documentary was played in Australian Parliament House on the same day as these major events, and a lot of Indian media picked up on the fact that both of those things were happening in a democracy like Australia.
Gautam Adani was once India's richest person, and indeed the fourth richest person in the world. But the embattled tycoon, who has close links to India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, saw his fortune plummet after an American firm accused him of stock manipulation.
Adani denies the allegations, but that hasn't stopped investors from pulling their support anyway. Hannah Jose has the story.
Stock manipulation, accounting fraud, the biggest con in corporate history. These are the allegations by Hindenburg Research, a short seller and forensic finance researcher. Short sellers find companies they think are overvalued and make their profits by betting the stock price will fall. It was a big bet against India's richest man, and it paid off. Gautam Adani's companies saw their share prices tumble, and the man himself had at least $50 billion slashed off his personal wealth. Hindenburg's report also set off a firestorm in Indian parliament.
Sir, are you going to shut him up, sir? Sir, are you going to shut him up, sir?
This was the issue on which Parliament was paralyzed in what is described as the budget session. For most of the session, there was no work because the government was not willing to concede the demand of opposition parties for a joint parliamentary committee. On top of that, the leader of the Indian National Congress, the largest opposition party in India, Rahul Gandhi's speech was censored 18 times.
India's market regulator, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, has been asked to investigate. But one of India's most prominent lawyers, arguing against Adani in a number of cases, says the independent regulator isn't acting very independent.
The Securities and Exchange Board of India has been sleeping over it and obviously deliberately sleeping over it. And there are conflicts of interest as are clear from the former chairman of SEBI, Mr. UK Sinha, now joining Adani's NDTV television company, which Adani has taken over.
While SEBI is investigating the allegations against Adani, it is also investigating Hindenburg Research for short-selling violations. A furious Adani published an over 400-page rebuttal accusing Hindenburg of attacking India itself, its institutions, and its ambitions. But accusations of illegality have been floating around the billionaire since at least 2004.
Several sets of allegations relating to the functioning of the Adani Group are in the public domain. The Securities and Exchange Board of India has been investigating and was alerted to by not just by media organizations, by a member of parliament to the Securities and Exchange Board of India. So these allegations and the investigations that have been going on in a somewhat erratic, intermittent, and I would even argue half-hearted manner.
Back in 2007, SEBI blocked the group's promoters from buying and selling securities for 2 years for their role in an alleged stock rigging scheme.
How did Hindenburg investigate this? Hindenburg's investigations are also based largely on what had already been published. So all this, in some way or the other, was in the public domain. Hindenburg has only put it together.
The Adani Group conglomerate has companies in significant sectors of the Indian economy. Mining, energy, infrastructure, media, to name a few. So what do the Adani company's fundamentals look like outside of India?
The group was materially overvalued on fundamental grounds. Now, ultimately, the Adani Group listed entities were seen to be winning dramatically favourable contracts on a consistent basis for most of the last decade from the government of India and state-owned enterprises, and the stock market repeatedly priced in that enormous opportunity for contracts that hadn't actually been won as yet. It's called blue sky valuation. So there was a huge divorcing of reality from the fundamentals of the group. One of the red flags that the regulator should have been drawing focus on was the fact that there was very little stock market coverage of the various listed Adani subsidiaries. So stockbroking analysts, normally on companies as big as the various Adani Group entities, they would have had 10 or 20 different analysts covering them, but in fact there was only published research by maybe 1 or 2 houses. That's a real red flag to the regulator.
But that begs the question. If these allegations have been out for years already without affecting Adani Group stock prices, then what changed with the Hindenburg report?
The accusations have been around for decades, that is correct, but they've never been accumulated in the level of detail by one financial institution who's effectively then short-sold all of the debt that Adani had been borrowing in the US markets, and then also said an open challenge to Adani, feel free to come and sue us, we'd love you to, because by the way, we get discovery, and as soon as we get discovery, our accusations will be proven to be true. And the fact that it's been done in the home of capitalism in Wall Street, it means it's not going to be resolved by Indian rules, it's going to be resolved in an American court.
An expert Supreme Court panel investigating Hindenburg's claims said it can't return a finding on a number of them, like the ownership of foreign shell companies or regulatory failure. It said the investigation has hit a wall. Another committee in the top court last year issued similar findings about claims the Indian government had used Israeli Pegasus software against journalists and dissidents. It said the government refused to cooperate. The market regulator's investigation around Hindenburg's report continues. The Adani Group did not respond to the ABC's request for comment.
Mark, this has been such a fascinating story to cover over the last few months because everyone thought Adani was completely untouchable, and even despite this Supreme Court ruling, his stocks haven't returned to the levels that they were before the Hindenburg report came out. And there's kind of split opinions on this Supreme Court finding. Some people are saying it's an exoneration for Adani. Other people are saying that the court's just thrown its hands up in the air and saying that they've drawn a blank. And there are a few conspiracies going around online, people saying that this is all a political plant. But of course, Adani has such close links to Modi, so there's been a lot of scrutiny on that relationship.
I think one of the things I find most fascinating is that kind of defence they put out is the conflation of criticism of Adani is in a sort of de facto criticism of India and India's identity.
Yeah, Mark, that was an interesting thing that kept popping up when this report first dropped, and obviously it's still going out. This is Adani's claim. It's saying that this company, it has so many fingers in different pies across India. It runs all different kinds of industries, and Modi and his government directly assign people like Adani to the economic growth that we have seen so much in India. And the opposition, especially here in India, has been calling for many inquiries which haven't come to fruition. So look, it depends who you speak to, but there are obviously some concerns that have been raised in this report.
Of course, Indian food is known for its spices, but did you know one of India's most distinctive spices has a secret that even most Indians don't know about?
This is one of India's most distinctive ingredients, responsible for giving a lot of Indian food its flavour. To Indian cooks, it's called hing. To Westerners, asafoetida. And the Germans call it Teufelsdreck. And it's also known as devil's dung, which gives you an idea of its key feature. Despite the smell, it's an essential ingredient. It does a similar job to onion and garlic, which are prohibited for religious reasons by many communities, including strict Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains. The spice is made by drying the resin from the Ferula asafoetida, a wild fennel that grows in cool, dry mountainous regions of Central Asia. Reportedly brought to the subcontinent by Alexander the Great, it's hard to grow in India with its much warmer and more humid climate. But the Indian Council of Scientific and Industrial Research is now cultivating hing in the Indian Himalayas. Scientists are confident, but they face a number of challenges. Ferula asafoetida grows dormant in harsh conditions, takes years to flower, and local farming won't get close to the quantities required for all of India. But if efforts are successful, they could save over $100 million in imports a year. It's incredible that an ingredient so essential to Indian cuisine isn't grown in India.
Someone who knows all about Indian spices is Asma Khan, award-winning chef, best-selling cookbook author, gender equality activist and star of the Emmy Award-nominated TV series Chef's Table. She joins me now after flying in from London for the Sydney Writers' Festival. Asma, welcome to India now.
Thank you very much.
There's obviously lots of beautiful recipes in here, but there's also your life story as well. And I think some people might not realise this. You landed in the UK in 1991 as part of an arranged marriage, and you say that cooking was a way out of loneliness for you. What did you mean by that?
I think it's very hard for people who are younger, and anyone in their 50s will understand. We wrote letters home. There was no phone, and there was no easy access to family in India. And now when people say they miss home, you can Skype your dog in Delhi. Yeah. I mean, you can have a conversation with your dog. But at that time, this was just letters. It was airmail envelopes and people sending letters. It was very hard. It was expensive to call, expensive to fly, no mobile phones, internets, and the phone in Calcutta hardly worked at home. So it was really an uprooting, which is almost impossible for anyone to feel that unless you go off to a remote place. But you suddenly, everything that was familiar, everything that was for you normal and loving and exciting suddenly ended. And I ended up in this kind of ivory tower in an Oxbridge College, marathon academic who I was trying to make friends with.
And so where does food fall into that journey for you?
I cooked to go home. In the aroma of the spices, as I cooked, I felt the presence of Ammu. I call my mother Ammu there. And then when I managed to feed people, even those who were not South Asian, there was silence. They had gone home too. There's something about when you cook with patience and love, you taste it. And for many of the students who had also were going through a similar experience as me, I then realized that this is what I really want to do in my life. But I didn't know how, because of course, at that time, you didn't see anyone accented, a Muslim immigrant, you know, setting up a restaurant. So it was like, that's obviously not for me, but I want to feed people. So I just continued to have loads of parties and feed lots of people.
The thing I didn't realise is that growing up, you didn't do a lot of cooking growing up, did you?
No.
So how did you learn?
Well, and me not learning how to cook is quite normal. I mean, it's like you have mosquitoes, it's hot, you don't go into the kitchen, girl, you know, and most families, middle class and above, would have a cook who would cook for you. This is normal in India. So it wasn't that I was this kind of really spoiled kid. I was a really spoiled kid. But
again, not mutually exclusive. Both of these things can be true at the
so
same
I
time.
was a spoiled kid, but I just didn't know how to cook. And I didn't learn before I got married, because my husband's this really liberal, chilled out person who told me, oh, I don't believe in gender roles. I can cook. I'll cook for you. Didn't tell me he only knows how to make one thing. Makes really bad rice. And I was like, you know, what have I got into?
So when was it you discovered that there was other people that would eat your food, that you could build a community around it? Where does that start?
I'm still in awe when I see my restaurant full. I don't think I still can deal with the fact that people make journeys, come across to eat my food. It's very humbling. I'm always grateful, and I go to every table to say thank you. This is not a PR exercise. I'm genuinely grateful. Because there are so many talented people. The fact that I am where I am, speaking to you, and people are listening to me and watching me, is humbling. And I realized when I was cooking from home, when I started doing supper clubs, I didn't have the confidence that anyone would pay to eat my food. So the initial supper clubs I did were all for hunger charities. We raised money for Yemen, we raised money for war zones. And I felt that even if they thought the food was not good, that they were donating the money to a charity, they won't come and tell me, oh, your pulao wasn't good. You know, I still feel nervous. I still feel nervous. And it's not because I just really want that experience that someone is eating my food to be beautiful. This is not arrogance. This is love. I want them to feel all the emotions that have gone into making that dish. That's the most expensive ingredient, is when you cook or anyone cooks, is their time. You can buy ingredients again and again, but that time that you spent cooking for someone you love is time you've invested in that dish. So I want them to feel that, experience that joy. Maybe I'm just, you know, I'm a very emotional person, and for me, food is not something you do to impress people, or you're trying to show off, or you're trying to... It's really about trying to heal and nourish from deep in your soul. I know it probably doesn't make sense to most people.
No, I think
but
it makes sense.
it's just this interaction. It's that bridge between people. When I cook for you, it's my communication of who I am, what I do, what my heritage is. In a world full of hate, where people hate people, the color of my skin, my name, my accent, through my food, I can bring the bridges down.
Your restaurant, Darjeeling Express, hired only women.
Yes.
What was the best lesson you learnt from hiring only women?
That men don't know how to cook, intuitively.
Intuitively. Okay, go on.
Because we are very patriarchal in India.
Yep.
Boys don't hang around the kitchen. Women eat last, girls eat least. These women cook intuitively. They watch, they don't ask for instructions, because most of the men, if you look at the Michelin star chefs in England for one, almost everyone's CV is identical. They went to hospitality school, they trained in 5-star hotels. This doesn't mean that they're not good, but that means they didn't learn how to cook intuitively. They had instructions, they were cooking in stainless steel empires, they had freezers. The first time I saw a freezer was in Cambridge. I thought there was a dead body inside it. Because I was like, oh my God, what is this huge thing I've never seen?
You set up a restaurant with women in northern Iraq, is that right?
Yes.
Why was that important for you to do?
Because this is my lived experience, that food can empower you. When you stand at the pass where the kitchen is and you sense something and you watch someone eat the food that you've cooked, it makes you feel like you've played a role in helping them. I was at a dinner, I heard about the Iraq, what had happened in northern Iraq, and that these Yazidi girls were the last who came down the mountains. And that entire refugee camp is displaced women, but they are without their mothers. Their mothers never made it back. And I felt this whole ache that, why can't I do something? I found out that they were being supported by governments and they had a stipend. They had money. So I just suggested to these women who I'd met that let's open a cafe. And she said, we never have cafes in refugee camps. I said, let's try it. They're now very successful. I have stopped funding them. They're self-funded. They make cakes, they make bread. They're absolute entrepreneurs. But it gave them dignity. It gave them a role to play. It made them feel their bodies were their own. These were women who were enslaved. Some of them were repeatedly sold. When who had enslaved them died, they were sold in the bazaars in northern Iraq. This is not anything you can even imagine. But when they cooked, I saw the joy. They felt they were being useful, because there's something that strips away your entire dignity. And I wanted to do something for my 50th birthday. I had saved the money for a very shallow thing. So I wanted to go on a motorbike, I wanted to buy a Harley Davidson, and I wanted to go to Europe and eat alone in restaurants, and eat alone and just be alone. And this for me was like the wildest thing I could do. So that money went into the camp. And I'm glad. I will never ride a bike. This will never happen. But I don't care, because I think I did something far more useful.
Asma, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you.
A harmonious coexistence with nature is often a big part of regional life here in India, and the land on which farmers work often carry a rich family history going back generations.
Tejas Bhatt shot this story in the northern villages of Kerala.
ನಮಸ್ತೆ, ನಾನು ಗೋಪಾಲಕೃಷ್ಣ ಭಟ್, ನನ್ನ ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಭಾರತಿ. ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರು ಕೃಷಿಕರಾಗಿ ಕೇರಳದ ನಾರ್ತನ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿನ ಒಂದು ಹಳ್ಳಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೃಷಿ ಜೀವನ ನಡೆಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ನನ್ನ ಹಿರಿಯರು 3-4 ತಲೆಮಾರುಗಳಿಂದಲೂ ಕೃಷಿಕರು. ನನ್ನ ಅಜ್ಜ 1954ನೇ ಇಸವಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಬಂದು ಈ ಭೂಮಿಯನ್ನು ಖರೀದಿ ಮಾಡಿ ನಾವು ಈ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನೆಲೆಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಇಂದಿನವರೆಗೂ ನಾವು ಕೃಷಿ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಈ ಸ್ಥಳದ ಹೆಸರು, ಈ ಮನೆ ಹೆಸರು ಸಾಲೆ ಎಂದಾಗಿರ್ತದೆ. ಈ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಅಡಿಕೆ, ತೆಂಗು ಮತ್ತು ರಬ್ಬರು ಮತ್ತು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಮೆಣಸು ಇವುಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ಕೃಷಿ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಜೀವನ ಸಾಗಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಪಾರಂಪರಿಕವಾದ ಕೃಷಿಯನ್ನೇ ನಡೆಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಈ ಭೂಮಿ, ಈ ಪರಿಸರ ನನಗೆ ನನ್ನ ಹೃದಯಕ್ಕೆ ತುಂಬ ಹತ್ತಿರವಾದಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಥಳ, ವಿಷಯ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ನಾನು 54ನೇ ಇಸವಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಜನಿಸಿ ಈ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ಹುಟ್ಟಿ ಬೆಳೆದು ಇಂದಿನವರೆಗೂ ನಾನು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಕೃಷಿಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ನನ್ನ ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನು ನಾನು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಳೆಸಿ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಮಾಡಿ ಅವರನ್ನು ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಉದ್ಯೋಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರನ್ನು ಹೋಗುವಂತೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ನಾನು ಪಟ್ಟಣದ ಜೀವನವನ್ನು ನೋಡಿದರೂ ನನಗೆ ಹಳ್ಳಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿಯ ಕೃಷಿ ಜೀವನ ತುಂಬ ಇಷ್ಟವಾಯಿತು. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಗುವಂತಹ ಫ್ರೆಶ್ ಗಾಳಿ ಮತ್ತು ಸುತ್ತಮುತ್ತಲಿನ ಗ್ರೀನರಿ ಮತ್ತು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಫ್ರೆಶ್ ವಾಟರ್ ಮತ್ತು ಇದು ಯಾವುದು ನಮಗೆ ಸಿಟಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಒಬ್ಬ ಕೃಷಿಕನಾಗಿ ನನಗೆ ಒಂದು ತುಂಬ ಸಂತೋಷ ಮತ್ತು ಮಾನಸಿಕ ತೃಪ್ತಿ ಇದೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂತ ಹೇಳಿದರೆ ನಾವು ಈ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಕೃಷಿಕರು ಪ್ರೈಮರಿ ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸರ್ಸ್. ನಾನು ಈ ಭೂಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಉತ್ಪತ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ಸಮಾಜಕ್ಕೆ ಕೊಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ನನಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಸಂತೋಷ ಇದೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ದೇಶದ ಆರ್ಥಿಕ ಬೆಳವಣಿಗೆಯಲ್ಲಿಯೂ ನಮ್ಮದು ಒಂದು ನಿರ್ದಿಷ್ಟವಾದ ಪಾತ್ರ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಡುಗೆ ಇರ್ತದೆ. ಇದು ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಸಿಗುವಂಥ ಅವಕಾಶವಲ್ಲ. ಮತ್ತು ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಸುಂದರ ಪರಿಸರವಾದ ವಾತಾವರಣ ಇದು ಬಹಳ ಇಷ್ಟದ ಒಂದು ವಿಷಯ. ಇದು ಅನುಭವಿಸಿದವರಿಗೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಇದನ್ನು ಹೇಳಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಉಂಟಷ್ಟೆ.